Welcome to Mental Health in the Time of Coronavirus, your computer-side chat with the experts. Today we will discuss why aren't Americans hearing more from mental health experts about the president's apparent mental health issues. I am Dr. Bandy Lee, president of the World Mental Health Coalition, a professional organization that focuses on having healthy leadership so as to help promote societal mental health. Today we have two distinguished speakers, both invaluable contributors to the dangerous case of Donald Trump. First, Dr. Stephen Soldz is a clinical psychologist, a professor at the Boston Graduate School of Psychoanalysis, past president of Psychologists for Social Responsibility, and a co-founder of the Coalition for an Ethical Psychology. Among his many activities, he has led efforts to end U.S. torture and to advocate for human rights. Next will be Dr. James Gilligan, a forensic psychiatrist, a renowned expert on violence, and a professor at New York University School of Law. He has served as Director of Mental Health for the Massachusetts prisons and was consultant to Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, Kofi Annan, the World Court, the World Health Organization, and the World Economic Forum. We will welcome them both. First, we will start with Dr. Soldz. Dr. Soldz?
Thank you, Bandy, and it's a pleasure to be here with you and with Dr. Gilligan. And I want to talk about the role of mental health professionals. We live, as everyone knows, in unusual, perhaps unprecedented times where we have leadership in our country that is very problematic, endangering us, as we're finding out now with the COVID-19 epidemic. We tend not to be good at engaging in this way. However, given the unprecedented nature of what we're faced with today, we need to do something different. But there is a tradition to fall back upon. So health professionals in general and mental health professionals have been involved in various ways in social justice efforts over the last number of decades. It was health professionals, including mental health people, physicians, psychologists, and others who played a major role in efforts to bring about nuclear disarmament and prevent nuclear war. It was health professionals, including, again, both physicians and psychologists, who played major roles in preventing torture. So in Turkish prisons, physicians are the first line in reporting on torture. And in the United States, my psychological colleagues and I have played a major role in opposing the role of psychologists in US torture at Guantanamo, at the CIA secret black site prisons, and the efforts of our colleagues, of some of our colleagues, to turn the other way at the involvement of some of us in this torture. So we now have a president who behaves bizarrely, we can say, that is impulsive, that is self-centered, and we have sort of a unique issue here because we have behaviors that all of us see. We mental health professionals have no unique angle on seeing the president's behaviors. What we have, however, is a way of understanding them in a broader context. And so we speak as citizens and as professionals in a dual role. We can point out his abnormal behaviors. We can raise questions, as Dr. Lee has been doing and Dr. Gilligan has been doing, as to whether these behaviors that we all see are representative of abnormal psychological states, or psychopathology, if you will. So our role here is not to diagnose, it is to say something seems wrong, that something should be done, that leaders in our government should say this isn't right and should take steps to have a better evaluation of what's going on there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Soldz. Next will be Dr. Gilligan. Dr. Gilligan, would you like to begin?
Sure. And again, thank you for inviting me. I'm really honored to be able to speak here on this very important subject. If I'm asked what has inhibited psychiatrists from commenting about Trump's psychopathology, I think the most immediate cause was the fact that the American Psychiatric Association stated that it would be unethical for psychiatrists to issue a psychiatric opinion about somebody whom they had not personally examined. I think I'm not going to try to speculate about what was going on in their minds because I haven't examined them in my consulting room. However, I do note that their attitude is not universal because the American Psychoanalytic Association, a group of certainly equally qualified and respected mental health professionals, does not believe that we should not speak out when we see somebody whom we think is either mentally ill in a way that makes him dangerous, or simply is dangerous whether or not he's mentally ill. My view about Trump is, it in some ways is not even relevant to me whether he has one particular diagnosis or another. If you simply take his comments, public comments, at face value, you could easily see that he meets the criteria for 6 or 8 different mental health diagnoses, according to the diagnostic manual of the Psychiatric Association. But to me, that's not really the relevant issue, because people can be mentally ill without being dangerous, and they can be dangerous without being mentally ill. The connection between dangerousness and mental illness is often only tenuous. When I look at Trump, what is clear to me is you don't have to be able to read his mind or examine him in your consulting room in order to know that he's dangerous. All you have to do is look at what his public statements are, his public behavior, and the effect he has on his followers. When I say that Trump is dangerous, I don't mean that he's dangerous in the way that many individual criminals are. After all, the most deadly mass murderers in human history have not necessarily killed anybody themselves. For example, I don't know if Hitler ever killed a single human being. Well, Hitler was dangerous not because of what he himself did, but because he incited his followers to be violent. And they were the ones who committed hundreds of millions of deaths, certainly tens of millions. Now, what is typical of Trump is that he, like real dictators, he's not yet a dictator, well, and he's certainly not Hitler. But like those people, he incites his followers to commit acts of violence. And they do. For example, and I'm quoting here verbatim, I'm not making this up or speculating. These are things he said that have been recorded on television. He, at his rallies, and talking about his reaction to people who oppose his political positions, he said, "I'd like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you. In the good old days, this doesn't happen because they used to treat them very, very rough. I love the old days. You know what they used to do to guys like that when they were in a place like this? They'd be carried out on a stretcher, folks. If you see somebody getting ready to throw a tomato, knock the crap out of them, would you? Seriously, just knock the hell out of them. I will pay for the legal fees, I promise you." Then when his followers did commit assault and battery against protesters at his rallies, and had to go to trial in courts to be tried for assault and battery. He complained that they were not being violent enough yet. When he said that if people didn't accept his political position, he's saying that his followers would create violence in the streets, verging on civil war. He said, I can tell you I have the support of the police, the support of the military, the support of the bikers for Trump, meaning what? Something like the Hells Angels, I guess. I have the tough people, but they don't play it tough until they go to a certain point, and then it would be very bad, very bad. So here he's threatening the American people, American citizens and American voters with mass violence in the streets if he doesn't get his way politically. And this goes on all over the world. For example, many mass murderers who've committed hate crimes, both in this country and others, have referred to Trump as their leader and example, including the man who murdered 11 people in the synagogue in Pittsburgh, the man from Florida who mailed bombs to several Trump opponents, such as Hillary Clinton, Obama, and so on, the man who killed a woman, and I've already mentioned, in Charlottesville, Virginia, the man who killed people in 2 different synagogues in New Zealand, and so forth. Every single one of those people quoted Trump as their supporter and the person who had stimulated them to do this. My concern about the ban on talking about this from the American Psychiatric Association reminds me of something that the Reverend Martin Niemöller, a Protestant minister in Germany, said when he realized after World War II that he and his colleagues, and that means many colleagues in Germany, including not just ministers, but also psychiatrists, physicians, judges, lawyers, professors, and so on, had not adequately spoken out against Hitler. The way Niemöller put it was, first they came for the socialists, and I didn't speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. So he got sent to a concentration camp finally. My point is that democracy is fragile. It is not invulnerable. And I think we've never seen as great a threat to our democracy as we do with our current president. That's not a matter of being able to read his mind or know what his motives are. I'm talking about his objective, publicly observable behavior and the equally objective, publicly observable behavior of his followers in direct response to his behavior and his rhetoric. So these are among the reasons why I think that whether or not Trump meets any particular diagnostic criterion is less important than the fact that we know that he's dangerous.
Thank you very much. Now we would like to move on to some questions from the public. We have received a lot of questions, over 100, very excellent ones, but we can only use a few. So here is a sampling. What types of treatment might someone who presented like Trump benefit from? Can patients like this be helped, or is it more about minimizing the damage they cause to others? Would either of you like to begin?
Now, if I were treating somebody who presents with the kind of behavior that he has and the rhetoric that he has, what I would say is this: I've worked with the most dangerous people our society produces in prisons and jails and mental hospitals for the criminally insane, that is, the violent mentally ill. What I've learned is the most important thing to do is, first of all, they do need to be isolated from the community, but that's because they are personally violent. Now, Trump is not personally violent, but what he has in common with this group is, I would say, a fundamental lack of self-esteem and self-respect. People who've suffered narcissistic injuries can enter into a state of narcissistic rage, which makes them angry at the whole world. The way you can enable people to outgrow this limitation is by giving them access to means for building up their own self-esteem. That means through education and therapy, but only under conditions in which they are isolated from the community enough that they can't act out their impulses. But so I think the issue is not so much trying to cure him as a person, it's to get him out of office so he won't be as dangerous to the world as he is.
Characters like Trump do not usually acknowledge to themselves and to others that something is fundamentally wrong and that they want treatment. It's generally in a situation where they get in profound trouble, like jail, like when Dr. Gilligan has worked with people, that treatment becomes possible. It doesn't generally work with personalities like this in the absence of some circumstance that makes it makes the motivation extremely strong in external circumstance.
The next one. I am completely baffled that this whole subject is not getting top story coverage. How can we change this?
If we say something that is relevant to politics, it's all too easy to say, oh, that's just politics, as though there's nothing rational about politics. I would say the opposite. You know, in medicine, we often recommend evidence-based medicine. I think it's time that we started to build up the possibility for evidence-based politics and base our political actions and opinions on actual evidence, such as the kind of evidence I was just citing that documents Trump's dangerousness. The fact that he incites people to commit mass murders and until they do that, complains that they're not being violent enough yet, and then threatens the public that they will commit even greater mass murder if he doesn't get his way or have his political power. So I think we need to overcome the taboo against speaking out about anything that could be relevant to the world of politics.
Unfortunately, contributing to this is something in our culture, which is the media. The media have failed in figuring out how to deal with Trump. They've gotten somewhat better than the early time, but only somewhat. They have this strong tendency to try and appear balanced, and that leads to this both sidesism. So all accounts are equal. You know, Trump says Earth is flat, scientists disagree. And we have that now with the hydroxychloroquine issue, where there's a drug that may have some benefit. It is not implausible to think that it might have some benefit. It certainly is not a miracle drug, but the press doesn't know how to report this, so they report it as a debate, and that makes it quite a bit harder here. They don't dare say that Trump is doing something that he really shouldn't be doing. So everything he does increases the range of what can be done. And we don't really have a solution for that. I think we do, as professionals and as citizens, have to speak out.
Next question. Do you agree that, in a sense, we are all now in a relationship with malignant personalities? It's a forced relationship, to be sure. But how can we, as citizens, protect ourselves from negative effects or becoming disordered ourselves? Would either of you like to answer?
But I think we need to band together and speak out publicly. And I think, just speaking for my own profession and all the mental health professions, I think it's important that we not let ourselves be hampered or rendered mute, even when some of our colleagues, whom I can perfectly respect, I just disagree with them, would say that we shouldn't speak out about these things. I happen to think that these issues are completely appropriate for us to speak out on.
I think that the questioner is also asking about how do we as individuals survive this, that it is very difficult and personally for many of us to be subjected to President Trump and, I would say, his enablers in this environment. And so I think there is an element of self-care that people have to sort of evaluate how much they can take. It's helped, for example, not watching the press releases that whatever they call the press conferences or whatever he calls them, his rallies these days, to stop watching, to pay attention to the news. And I think it's problematic when some people turn off totally and say, I can't deal with this. And what we want to avoid that, because that allows the malignancy to continue. We need to be able to engage, but that also means that we need realms of our life that aren't contaged by this. Most importantly, community. And of course, in the current environment, it's extremely difficult because we're more isolated than usual. We are fortunate at having things like Zoom that allow a level of community with each other that we wouldn't have in prior times, but that's no substitute. So we need to find a balance for ourselves. And it doesn't help anyone to let yourself get overwhelmed. I tell my colleague activists that we're in a marathon, we're not in a sprint. And so you can't let yourself get worn out by getting outraged by whatever the latest outrage is that has gotten to you, because we need you the next day, and we need you next week, and we need you next year, and we're going to need you for a long time.
Thank you once again, Stephen, Jim, for this excellent discussion, and thank you to all the audience who have joined us and participated with your questions. We will meet again. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.